Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey,
Oh, hey guys.
Hi, everyone. Mona, we can't see you. Oh, I can see you
Can you see
now.
me? Hi. How are
Hello.
you?
You guys, it's been so long.
oh, so
Me
long.
too.
I miss you guys.
All right. So, honestly, we really need to talk about this because we need to decide whether or not we're going back to Quebec.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I wanted to talk about technology in the classroom because I think it's a really big deal these days, and we should really think about it before we start moving.
Mhm.
So, in the classroom, it's a really big deal, and technology is already really prevalent. And most classrooms have at least one computer or a smart board or even tablets and laptops. And many teachers use this technology to enhance the regular classroom experience and to relate to the students and their interests. I find using technology can really add to the classroom experience because it can provide differentiation and technology can be interactive and engaging. And it can provide interesting ways for students to learn outside of the classroom while feeling like the same amount of resources are available to them. And I think an example of this is online tutoring websites and applications. And for a small fee, learners can access ESL teachers, and I think it's really interesting. And so I was reading an article from USA Today, and it said there's about 100 Chinese-based apps. Isn't that crazy? And so these companies are based in Canada and the US, and then they provide education services for Chinese students online. And so one of the apps that we use actually, and that could be used for this, is 51 Talk. So I'm going to show you guys the app that I use when I teach online. And so as you can see, this app is called 51 Talk. And basically all my classroom reservations would go here. Right now I don't have any, but when I do, they would go here. And then I would press enter classroom, and then I could start teaching any student. And so it provides a really good way to learn English without moving from your house or from your country. So I think that's really interesting. What do you guys
Yeah,
think?
it is interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like some of the programs we use when we teach ESL online are pretty similar, kind of the same concept. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely very helpful and really cool.
Yeah, and I don't think it's gonna remove teachers, but I think it's gonna add to the students' learning experience and allow them to have access to teachers at home, like for example when they're studying.
Hmm.
So I think we'll still have our jobs in the classroom, but we'll also have opportunities to make extra income at home and on our free time. So that's pretty much it. That's what I think technology is gonna be like. What do you think, Mona?
Absolutely, that's very interesting because I would like to continue my job as a teacher in Quebec and working with learners which has difficulties in learning with exceptionalities. I did a little bit research about a special education setting in Quebec. As we know, the special education is typically described to serve students with exceptionalities such as physical disabilities, developmental disorder, behavioral disorder, and any other challenges which is dealing with learning. Historically, in 1700 to 1800, handicapped people were completely excluded from the general setting. It means starting with typical learners. And the movement of inclusive learning in Canada started somewhere between 1950s to 1990s. Recently and these days, we observe that the framework for education all over Quebec is inclusive education. I found a definition by Ministry of Education, and it's very interesting, Karina, because it is mentioned in the definition that the inclusive setting objective is preparing learners for dealing with the digital world. I really like to read the exact definition of the Ministry of Education about inclusive education. An inclusive education system that helps people succeed throughout their lives, an education system backed by the commitment of its partners and stakeholders that produces responsible, competent, and creative citizens who are prepared for the digital world and fully engaged in a society where people of all ages regularly participate in physical, recreational, and sports activities in a safe manner. So even in the definition, we see the importance of technology.
Mhm.
However, we know that kids with exceptionalities always need something, uh, something more, that we define it as differentiation in instruction. And in all over the courses that we had in TESOL program, we learned how to differentiate the instruction for them. But there has been conflicts between parents and educations that I read among many articles, and it was the identification of the educational problem. And many educators, teachers, and parents had problems with placement decisions, and also problems that are dealing with eligibility of the learners. Are they eligible to be in the inclusive setting, or completely in a different setting? And more important than everything was the overly costly and labor intensive services. The cost for giving special services and as expert assistance is apparently high for both the school boards and the schools. I did a little bit research to review Quebec in a special needs education, and I found an article in CBC that government has started to pay special attention since 2017. I'm gonna share this breakdown of information that I found in the article, and it's clearly explaining that. It's clearly explaining that, as you see, there is a specific budget that they assigned for especially elementary and pre-elementary services for 94 million. That is very important because um, early intervention in special education is very important, but it is predicted in 2017 that by 2019 to 2020 it's going to be to 161 like $1 million, but I think it didn't happen. Other reports of teachers and expert assistants said that there was a huge cut in the budget for inclusive learning framework, and we see that I could see the future of special needs education is they really needs to pay more attention on the budget that they wanna give to special needs education. And I found some areas that both governments and Ministry of Education really needs to put into attention. One of them is predictability and sustainability and sufficient resources that they wanna give to special education, and any budget, any rising numbers of teachers and any expert assistance they always think about to be consistent and to be predictable and sustainable. And that's, I think, I found about the special education needs in Quebec for the future.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing all that information. It's
You're welcome.
interesting. I know that school boards manage resources for schools, so budgets that the schools will then use to allocate for various things, including meeting the needs of students with exceptionalities. I wonder what that would look like with Bill 40. So I was looking into it a little bit, and I found that basically Bill 40 is defined as an act to amend the Education Act with regard to school organization and governance. So there will be a board of directors in charge of running the service centers, which will effectively replace the school boards that we have now. So for example, in Montreal, we have Commission Scolaire de Montréal, Commission Scolaire Marguerite Bourgeois. So those would just basically replace those. So when I was looking into understanding what that would look like, I made a little visual just to sort of understand what that would be. So I will share my screen with you.
Oh,
This
cool.
is my
That'll
little
be really
drawing.
helpful.
That's cool.
Cool. So yeah, basically the service centers, there'll be two types because we do have the English and the French sector here in Montreal. So the board of directors for the French sector will look something like this. So you have 4 community members, you have 8 parents, and you have 4 school staff. So like teachers, principal, that kind of thing. And then as you can see, the English Center looks very similar. However, they have more parents that could be on the board, in fact, 8 more. So it's definitely a lot more members. The reason for this was because it was kind of a way to compromise. A lot of Anglophone communities and English school boards fear that they will lose the ability to manage their school system. So this was kind of a way to mitigate that. Yeah, so that is that. The main question, however, remains unanswered. We kind of want to know how this bill will directly affect schools, teachers like ourselves, and students. So one thing that I found was that apparently service centers will have more independence from the Ministère de l'Éducation. So, for example, they'll be able to authorize renovation projects. This could potentially mean that the process when we request important changes in our schools could be maybe sped up a little bit so we can get what we need faster. That's kind of the idea behind it. Jean-François Roberge, the Minister of Education, was quoted saying that he wants to depoliticize decision-making by ending school elections, but also decentralizing by shifting power from the province to the regional level. So we often talk about school boards being abolished with this bill, but there's also like other consequences that directly affect students. One of them that I found out about was enrollment. So basically, parents will be able to choose schools that best fit the needs and interests of their children, regardless of the territory and like the proximity to the school. So in other words, students will no longer fall under the jurisdiction of a school board. So that's pretty much what I found for Bill 40. Piotr, I know that you said that you found information about Bill 21. What's that all about?
Well, your bill seems way more interesting than mine at that point. Mine seems a bit backwards sometimes. So it's an act respecting the laicity of the state. The laicity here is described as be having 4 principles: separation of church and religion, religious neutrality of the state, the equality of all citizens, and freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. So the bill has the rules that would require citizens to uncover their faces to receive a public service for identification or security purposes. The people affected by this bill will be public workers or people in positions of authority, and it will ban them from wearing religious symbols. So the people that are mostly affected by this will be Muslim women, as large cities in Quebec have many immigrants from Muslim countries. This is in part due to Quebecers having expressed a concern surrounding the hijab and the niqab, because they have like certain beliefs that those are symbols of female inferiority. So because women make up the majority of a school staff, female Muslim teachers are pretty targeted by this bill.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
That's horrible.
So yeah, it is.
Exactly.
So let's see. I think this bill has a few issues, not just with like racism and maybe sexism, because it's just men telling women what to wear. So yeah, the hijab or the niqab doesn't necessarily have to be a symbol of a female inferiority. For some, it has like some feminist connotation. It just means to have like a modest dress. It's only a small minority of women that express concern of oppression related to that to what they're wearing there. So like this anti-religious sentiment that we have in Quebec is nothing new. Like we've seen Pauline Marois's Charter of Quebec Values, Bill 60 there, back in what was it, 2012. That's not too long ago even.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's kind of rooted in Quebec's history. Like the Catholic Church had a lot of say during like Duplessis' time, and the fact that the church and state were so closely knit back then, there were some anti-Catholic behaviors rooted in Canadians' English Protestant heritage, which tried to bar Catholicism from politics. Therefore, like they marginalized Catholics in the province of Quebec since the Treaty of Paris back in like in 1774.
Wow.
And from this point, the church and the government were working together a lot. So after the Duplessis era is where Quebec started modernizing its policies related to education and removing education as one of the church's responsibilities. And we have to thank the boomers for that, though. We've been hating on them a little lately, but They did do some good back in their time.
Okay, boomer.
So they were unsympathetic with the church. Because they excommunicated the patriots. They forced their mothers and grandmothers into like reproductive servitude, and then controlled the access to higher education, and turned a blind eye to a lot of sexual abuse, flirted with fascists, colluded with reactionary politicians to
Oh my
keep French Canadians in permanent state of backwardness. Yeah.
God.
Okay, yeah, so definitely I can understand that this bill didn't come out of nowhere. It definitely has a history. Thanks for all that information. Katrina, what did you find about the future of classrooms in Quebec?
So I was talking to my friend who's a teacher in Quebec still, and she noticed a huge change in classroom settings. So the setup of the classroom and how it's currently changing and will continue to change in the future. So traditionally a classroom was seen as, the setting in particular was like seen as a place where the teacher is in the front and they're expressing their thoughts and their lecture and their knowledge and their experiences, and the students are sitting and just being sponges absorbing all this like information given, and they're sitting in an arrangement where it's more separated, more like on their own and facing the teacher, while now there's been a lot of change where it's less teacher centered and it's more let me show you. It's less teacher centered.
Oh, cool.
Wow,
That's a cool way to represent
that's
it
amazing.
visually.
Yeah,
So
I like that.
So traditionally it was really like the paper clips here are the students. It was really much like sitting on their own, they're quiet, they're listening, they're absorbing information. Whereas now it's more of a less of a teacher-centered approach and more of a student-centered approach. So students are walking around, they're mingling, they're working in teams, and the teacher is doing less talking and presenting and more circulating. So we can see here that this is the teacher-centered learning. So the teacher is in the front, she or he, sorry, is expressing their knowledge and their experience, and the students are sitting and listening. Whereas now we have more of a student-centered learning where teachers are more quiet and more observing and monitoring and walking around, and the students are sharing their own knowledge and their own experiences with each other. So that's like a big change that's happening, and it's continuing and will continue in the future. Another thing, like Karina was talking about before, that technology has emerged a lot and has changed the way we use the classroom as a teacher and a student. So classroom management has been changed, especially for the primary and secondary levels. So a good example of this is Class Dojo. So Class Dojo is a application that teachers use to give and take away points. So I think in the past, it was more if you wanted to communicate with a parent or guardian, you would write them a note, you would call them on their phone, on the phone, or you would see them at parent-teacher interviews. Well, now it's more instant. So the parent is connected to this app on their phone and they can see positive and negative things that their student is doing. So I think this is a great way that positive reinforcement for students is given. And so it's less on the negative and more on the positive. So as you can see here, this is a teacher giving points or taking away points for students. And it works well for students and for parents and the teacher as well. So I think this is a good example of how technology is impacting classroom management. If we're talking about classroom if we're talking about classroom setting, we can look at like higher education, so university level, and classrooms are not only given anymore in the physical setting, so there are a lot of classes that are online and they are worth the same amount of credits as a regular in physical classroom. So we're seeing how online platform can also be a great way of instruction, and I'm sure that in the future this will expand to more online classes and more education online. So online allows group work, allows, students to talk to each other, allows students to work on their own. It also allows teachers to teach wherever they want.
I really love that. I think that's so true.
Right,
That
yeah.
was very interesting. Yeah.
So
And
I
kids
was
just love technology as well, right?
right, yeah. They're big
Yeah.
on technology.
Totally.
So I was also reading an article from the Montreal Gazette, and they were talking about how I was saying before that classroom was very much set up with desks and chairs, like plastic chairs, and a blackboard. And now that's changing a lot. So now we see a lot more diverse forms of sitting, a lot more diverse ways of being in a classroom, the setup of it. So 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 we have like students no longer sitting on plastic
Oh.
chairs. They can be sitting
Yeah.
on things like beanbags, stools, bouncing balls. They can be sitting on things other than chairs. If they want, they can sit on chairs. There are also many classrooms now. It's a new concept, and I think it'll continue in the future. They don't really have an assigned seat anymore. They have like their books and their material set up in either their locker or like a basket, but they can change seat. They're not limited to where they want to sit. So I think different styles of classrooms, like bouncing balls and not just facing the teacher, but more of a collaborative setting, allows students and teachers to feel more comfortable in their space, because classrooms, I feel like, are, especially for young kids, are like the place they spend the most amount of time, more than, let's say, home, right? So allowing them to feel comfortable in their environment, with where they want to sit and how they want to sit. So some classes have like here couches, carpet, bean bags, bouncy chairs, a stand bicycle. So kids who have like a lot of energy and they need to burn it, but they want to learn, they can go on that. So
I love that. That's really amazing.
Yeah,
I
it's
really
awesome.
love those classes. And
Yeah.
I hope teachers would have those chairs too.
yeah,
I really hated sitting in rows when I was in high school.
yeah,
Yeah, that's cool. I think with all this information, like I'm really looking forward to the potential of like moving back and seeing what education will look like in Quebec. I'm personally really excited. I hope I see you guys in Montreal sometime
Me
soon.
too.
Yeah. And if we decide to move back, I think we should like meet up and talk about it in
Yeah,
person
for
too.
sure.
yeah. I really appreciate talking to you guys, because I feel like the future was so unclear for now, like for me being
Yeah.
so far away. So now, like talking to everyone, I feel like I have like a clear like perspective of what's going to happen in the future.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, I hope to see you guys soon. We should really call each other soon.
Okay.
Yes,
I hope
definitely.
to see you
Okay.
too.
Bye.
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 Have a
Thank you
good
so much
evening
for
or day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.